Hello and welcome to Katrinas Creations. This is the Friday edition. Today I am going to be talking about how to make a sweater by knitting or crocheting without a pattern, and it's all about the math, and we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. I did want to share with you ahead of time what I am wearing. This is a scarf. It's knit as a tube, and then you connect it together with like a provisional cast on at the end. And it is, see if I can hold this up enough for you, it's leaves. There, you can really see it. And this particular pattern, it is called Colors of the Wind. It is from a book called Knitting with Disney, and the designer is Katrinas Gray. I think the only way you can get the pattern is through the book itself. I don't know if it's available anyplace else. I got the book, borrowed it from the library years ago. I think it's based on Pocahontas or something. It was a whole bunch of different patterns based on Disney princess movies type of thing. So anyway, this again is called Colors of the Wind. And the yarn that I used in here, this rust color here, one of my co-workers had gone to Peru and she brought this yarn back from it was hand dyed down in Peru. So she brought that back for me. And then this color here, this darker brown, which is extremely soft, it is alpaca. And we have some friends of ours who are missionaries in Peru, and they gave me a skein of that when they came to visit. So I incorporated both of those Peruvian yarns together when I made this. And I think the rest of the yarn in this is Knit Picks Palette, I believe. Could be wrong, but I think that's what it is. So now we're going to be talking about how to make a pattern for yourself. It could be knitted, crocheted, any yarn weight, and any size hook or needle. It's all based on a math formula. So you are going to have to do a swatch. I know, none of us like to do swatches, and I cheat because if you look at most patterns, they will tell you to do a 4" by 4" swatch. I don't do that. Sometimes I just tend to start knitting or crocheting the pattern in the size I think will work, and then when I get a little ways into it, enough that I've got an inch or two, that's what I use as my swatch. So you are going to have to take some measurements beforehand. So I'm going to tell you the measurements so you can see what I'm talking about as we go. So you are going to want to measure the circumference of your neck based on where you want the collar to fall. So like this is a crew neck sweater, so I would measure where I want this neckline to be. If it's a scooped neck further down, you want to measure how many inches or centimeters, depending on which system you use, how big around. So you're going to want to measure the neck. You're going to want to measure the shoulder, which would be from the neck to the edge, the top of your arm. You're going to want to measure the circumference of your upper arm and the circumference of your wrist if you're making long sleeve. If you're making a short sleeve, then you want to do the second measurement wherever you want that end sleeve to fall. You're also going to measure however long you want your sleeve to be. So if it's full length, you're going to measure all the way to your wrist. You know, if it's 3/4 length, you'll measure to there, or whatever length you want from the tip of your shoulder here to wherever you want that sleeve to fall. Then you are also going to measure your bust, and you are also going to measure the length you want your sweater from your underarm down to the length you want it. If you want a tunic, of course, it's going to be over your hips. If you want a cropped sweater, I don't do cropped sweaters, but if you want one, you want to measure how many inches from under the arm down to whatever length that would be. So that's what you are going to be working off of, are those basic measurements. Now I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see what I'm going to be doing in the formula with the actual crochet and knitting and how I do that. So let me get the camera turned around for you. So I will start with crochet. Now this pattern, I knew I was going to be using single crochet. I had tried several different stitches and I wanted something that you could not see through. The only spots you can see through a little bit are where there's double crochet, but for the most part, it is all single crochet. So I'm going to use a tape measure, and I'm going to measure 1 inch from one stitch here to this spot here, which is where my 1 inch would be, and I'm going to count how many stitches are in between there. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches to the inch with my crochet. So I'm going to write that down for how many stitches per inch. And then I'm also going to measure how many rows it takes to equal 1 inch. So again, I'm going to place that there, and then I'm going to count. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have 8 rows per inch to do height-wise of my stitches. Now let me show you with knitting, you're going to be doing the exact same thing. This one does not have as many stitches to the inch because the crocheted sweater is fingering weight, this is worsted weight. And this one I already know because I measured it ahead of time. And I'm going to match it from one stitch here. And I'm going to count over to here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it takes 5 stitches to equal an inch. And now let's count how many rows to equal an inch. And I'll start it right on a color right here. So we have 1 to 2 here, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 5 inches or 5 stitches this way to equal an inch, and 6 rows to equal an inch. All right, so using those measurements, this is how we're going to figure out our formula. So this I'm going to do the figuring for just using some rough measurements here, not necessarily the measurements for either of these sweaters, just to make things simple. So the neckline, I'll draw this here. The neckline of my sweater, I want it to be 25 inches in circumference. So 25 inches, and we're going to say, given we'll have a fictional sweater here, we'll say that I'm getting 5 stitches to the inch, which is what I'm getting on that knitted. So if we multiply that times 5, that tells me I need to cast on, or if it was crocheting, I'm going to chain 125 stitches. Now we have this section of your sweater, and here's your sleeves. I am no artist, and you'll see that on Saturday's videos. Make sure you watch tomorrow's video if you want to see my attempt at painting. It's quite laughable, but anyway, as you can see, artwork is, I wish my arms were that skinny, but anyway. So when you are doing a sweater and you're measuring from your shoulder from here to here, this is going to be the most increase in stitches, is this area right here, this yoke. This whole area here is kind of defined as the yoke, and it's not an increase of a whole lot of inches this way, but you're going to have a lot of increase in stitches to get this width. So we're going to say figuratively, and I wish my figure was this, but it's not. If you were measuring from the neck down to the shoulder, so one measurement I forgot to tell you is you want to measure the circumference of your shoulder, so all the way around to your shoulder. From one side, go around and around the back. So for this case, we will say that it was 35 inches, okay? We're again going to multiply by 5, and that gives you 175. Now this is only maybe a 3-inch change here. Between the neck and the base of your shoulder is only maybe about 3 inches. So we know that in that 3-inch period, we are going to have to increase 50 stitches based on our formula. So that's what I was meaning. This section here is going to have a lot of increases to go from something this narrow to this wide. It's not as drastic anywhere else as it is in this section. So you're going to have to figure, based on your formula, how many rows it takes to reach the 3 inches. So let's just figuratively say we were getting 6 rows to the inch and it's 3 inches. That means I'm going to have 18 rows between my neck and the edge of my yoke, the bottom of the yoke. So I'm going to have to increase 50 stitches over 18 rows in order to get it out to the width that I need it to be. And if you wanted to figure out the math for that, you could divide, so you're going to have to divide 18 into 50 to figure out how many stitches you're going to have to increase per row in order to get close to this 175. Which is going to come out roughly, I've done the little math here, 18 times 3 is going to give you 54. Over 18 rows, you are going to have to increase 3 stitches per row in order to get it to that, an increase of 50. In this case, it'd be 54. That last row, you can add a little less or whatever on the very last row. When you come here, count your stitches and see how many you do need to add, because you're never, very rarely going to have the exact 50 stitches. You're going to have to kind of fudge that last row right in there to figure it out. So next you're going to be working, once you've got your width here, you want to make sure that you have your sleeve opening large enough for your circumference. And remember, you measured your circumference, because you want to make sure your sleeve opening is wide enough for your arm to get through. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So as you are knitting or crocheting down at this point, you also want to check the bust measurement here. And let's say the bust measurement was 40 inches in circumference. Again, you're going to go times 5 per the 5 stitches. That's going to be 200. So we know that we had 175 here, and to go to here to 200, you know that this distance from the top of the shoulder to the bust, you're going to need to increase an additional 25 stitches. When you reach the bottom of the bust, it should be pretty close to the opening you're going to need for your arms at that point. And then from there, you're going to do the same thing for measuring the bottom of your sweater, however long you choose to make it. And you're going to be measuring from the underarm down. So let's say that it is, say, 14 inches. So you're going to take 14 times however many rows it took per inch. So let's just, for the sake of ease, say it took you 6 rows to equal an inch. So you're going to multiply 14 times 6, and that's going to tell you you're going to be needing 84 rows to reach to the base of how long you want your sweater to be. Now if you're doing your arms, and say you're making long sleeved, I'm going to draw your arm out up here. So here's the top of the arm. So if it is a long sleeve sweater, and again, don't you love the artwork, it tapers down to your wrist. So let's say that your arm length from the tip of your shoulder to your wrist is 24 inches. And we were saying you were getting 6 rows per inch, so again you would multiply that times 6, and that means you're going to have 84 rows for your sleeve here. Now you're going to take the measurement that you had at the top of your shoulder. Let's say your upper arm was 20 inches in circumference, but your wrist down here is 10 inches in circumference. So you're going to figure out how many stitches to the inch did you get. And again, we're going to base it off of 5. So we know 20 times 5 is 100. 10 times 5 is 50, which should tell us that over this 84 rows going down to your wrist, you're going to decrease 50 stitches each or you're going to decrease 50 stitches. So you're going to count the number of rows you have, and you're going to divide 50 into that 54, and that would tell you how many stitches you're going to have to decrease each row, or if you decide to do it every other row, which is kind of more that you don't want to decrease every single row all the way down your wrist. Figure out how many decreases you want to do. So say we want to do a total of 10 decreases. So say it was marked down like this for 10. Every 10th row, we would be wanting to decrease 5 stitches on that row all the way down in order to reach to the 50 stitches here at the wrist, as opposed to the 100 stitches that you started out with. So another tip that I do, whether I'm crocheting or knitting, when I am doing a sleeve, is every time I do a decrease row, and like I said, you're not going to decrease every single row. It's going to be like every 5 rows, every 10 rows, something like that. I put a stitch marker, a removable stitch marker, all the way down so that when I go to make the second row, I can very easily keep track of how many decreases I've got and make sure my sleeves are the same length. Like I said, I do this whether I'm knitting or crocheting. Also, if I don't do the sleeve in one sitting, which very rarely happens, I'm not that fast. If I have to stop partway through, I can just count my decreases and I'll figure out what row I was on before I have to do the next decrease. So like I said, this whole process is a matter of math, and most of the time it works. I have had a couple exceptions, but most of the time this does work, and you can change the neckline, and like I said, that will change your cast on amount or your chain, foundation chain amount. So you can modify your sweater the way you want to. The important thing is when you do your swatch is to do the swatch in the stitch that you are going to be knitting the sweater in, because that can change. If you're doing cables, it's going to squish in a lot. If you're doing just single regular knitting, it's going to be flatter, so it's going to take less stitches per inch. The same with crocheting. A double crochet or a shell stitch is going to be different in your count than a single crochet would be. So I hope you found my little artwork helpful. So today's Getting to Know You segment is going to be with Beverly Simmons, who lives up in Canada in Newfoundland. And so she's going to tell you a little bit about herself. You have one more week to get entered for the scrap along. So if you are interested in getting entered in that make along, you can do so. You can contact me over at Katrina Knits on Facebook or KatrinasCreations@yahoo.com. Just send me a picture of your entry. It just needs to be made with either mini skeins or scrap yarn. You can incorporate whole skeins along with it, but somewhere in the project, it does have to have scraps or mini skeins involved. And I will be drawing a winner next Friday. So thank you all for watching, and if you think my artwork was bad here, wait till you see what I show you tomorrow. So I will see you again tomorrow. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you found this helpful. If you have, please give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you later. Bye, everybody.